Hey everyone, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and this is part 2 of our video series on making a bar chart in Unity using its UI tools. So in our last video, we made our prefabs to create these bars in our bar chart, and we were kind of manually creating these bars and deleting them to show that, we can create these different, that they size to whatever size we need based on the number of data points we have. But now what we want to do is we want to jump into our scripts and into our classes and tell our bar chart class, instead of us putting these bars in one at a time, or we don't necessarily know how many data points we'll have. So we're instead going to say, hey bar chart, we're going to give you some data, and however many data points you have, make these bars and size them appropriately. So let's get started with this. First thing we can do is we can delete all 3 of these bar holders. Remember, we have one in our prefabs here. And now we're going to go over to bar chart, and we're going to jump into mono-develop. So I'm going to double click on this, open this up. I'll zoom in a little bit here so you can see what I'm doing. And so this is our bar chart class. Then we also have our bar class. I'm actually going to use the bar class first quickly, because this is going to be pretty quick, but important to do. We're going to say using Unity engine.ui. Keep that as a mono behavior. We can delete these, but we are going to quickly add a public image and just call that bar. Now if I jump back to Unity for a second, we'll see that in our prefab of our bar holder, we now have this image that we can drag our bar into. And that's just because, like I said, this is just a holder for the bar, whereas this is the actual visual thing that we're going to want to be altering. So now we have a reference to that image so that we can, our bar chart can tell the holder what it should be changing the size of. Okay, back into mono-develop, we can go over to bar chart. And we can delete, update, we're not going to need that. I will keep start around. I'll get rid of this comment though. So to start in here, we're going to need access to that prefab. So I'm going to say public bar prefab. And again, it's always, I find it useful whenever you create something like that, go back into Unity right away and add that in, because otherwise what often happens is I'll spend 20 minutes coding something, jump into Unity, hit play, and the first thing that happens is it says that the thing you're trying to instantiate is null, or something can't be found because you didn't put it in there, put it in that slot. So now that we have the bar prefab there, it will be able to take this prefab from the folder and make as many copies as we need. Back in mono-develop, the other thing I'm going to add here, actually I'm going to add a couple of quick. I'm going to add using Unity engine.ui again. I'm not sure we're going to need that, but better safe than sorry. And system.collections.generic. And the reason I'm using generic is because we don't there might be a situation where we want to start adding or removing data points, and in those cases a list is a lot easier for us to use than just using a straight array of data points. So I'm going to create a list of bar called bars, and it's going to equal a new list bar. And what that is, this is going to store all of our bars so that if we do want to dynamically edit them later, we're going to have access to those right away rather than having to iterate through or anything like that. The other thing, actually with that, what we can do now is we can jump into our start function. And actually we need to create a new function before we can do, because what we're going to want to do in this start function is say display the graph. However, we don't have any function that does that. So let's create a new function here. We're going to call it void display graph, because we're not feeling too creative this morning. And we're going to give it a series of values. I'm going to use floats. You could use ints if you wanted to instead, but floats are going to give us a little bit more flexibility in terms of what those values are. So I'm going to say float, and we'll do an array of floats called vals. Now and a little handy thing, if you double tap the tab button after you write the word for, it'll automatically give you the iterator structure here. And just whatever's blue is what you're editing from there. So right now I'm editing the maximum here, which that's going to be vals.length. And then we can just hit enter to get out of that. And now for every value we have in this array, we're going to instantiate a new bar. So we're going to say bar new bar equals, so this is a bar that we're creating, is going to be equal to instantiate bar prefab as bar. So creating a new bar. Now right now this bar is just kind of floating in our scene, doesn't really know where it belongs, so we're going to want to make sure that we set it to set its parent, and we want that parent to be this actual bar chart. So what we can do is just say new bar dot transform dot set parent to transform. Don't just say this, because it's not going to be able to. You have to set parents always to a transform. So we're setting it to the transform of the bar chart. So we're setting it to this right here. From here, actually we can kind of start with this. So now we can go back into our start function, and we can say display graph, but we need to pass it some kind of a float, or some type of array of floats. So let's create one of those first. We're going to say float vals equals, and we can rename, actually we'll name this float values, let's say, equals 0.1f, 0.2f, and 0.7f. So we've got these three values inside of curly braces, and now what we can do is just say display graph and pass in that values array. Let's save. Now if we go into our game, what we should see now is when we hit play, 3 bars will appear. And sure enough, there they are. 1, 2, 3. They're obviously not sized yet for us, and that's something we're going to want to do. And we'll jump into that right now. But we are getting the 3 bars that weren't in the scene when we started, and now they are appearing. So that's a good start. So in order to size these, sizing is a little bit tricky with the UI system because there's no really convenient way to just get the height of something using Unity's UI system. Rect transforms use a thing called size delta, which is basically comparing its size to its parent size. But it's not the most convenient way of figuring out, like when you really just want an int, and you want to say, oh, this chart is 100 units high, just make this bar 70 units high. You have to do a little bit of legwork to get that to happen. So we're going to do that right now. We're going to start by giving a float called chart height. And we're not going to assign anything to that yet. But in our start function, we're going to say before anything else, we're going to find that chart height. And how we find it is we're going to say chart height equals screen.size. And screen.size gets you literally what it says, whatever your screen space is, or whatever your Windows space is, rather, that the X and Y height and width of that screen. And we're going to add to that get component rect transform. So getting the rect transform of our chart, size delta dot y. Oh, apologize. Not screen.size, screen.height, which gets you the y, the number of pixels in height that your screen is. And then we're getting the y size delta. So what the size delta is if we go back to our bar chart, we see that it's a panel, so it's stretching in both directions, but in particular the y direction. So the size.y is actually the difference in top and bottom. So minus 60 here and minus 60 here. So it's 120 pixels smaller than the size of our screen. So all we're doing here is saying if the screen is, say, 1,000 pixels high, then 1,000 pixels plus negative 120 is 880 pixels is the height that we have. So that's, like I say, what we're doing here is we're getting, instead of using these sort of relative values, we're getting a hard number of saying this is 880 pixels or whatever it is. And what all this lets us do now is that when we go to our bar, we see that our bar just has a height. So it doesn't have that relative where we're trying to figure out what the relative size is. We just want a straight up number there. So now that we have a straight up number for the height of the chart, we can then give our bar a solid number to work with. So, which is all a long way of saying what we're going to do down here now. Now that we have a set chart height, we can say here, new bar. Actually, I'm going to first get this rect transform is kind of takes or the bars rect transform takes a little while to get. So I'm going to say rect transform RT equals new bar dot get component rect transform. And now we're going to say RT dot size delta equals new vector2 RT dot size delta dot x. So we're keeping the x the same size. We don't want to change the width of the bar. But now the height, instead of being what its current height is, which is just 100, we're going to change it to the chart height times vals I. So the current, whatever the current value we're passing in. And this works right now for us because these are all between 0 and 1. If we had one that was, you know, say 1.1, it would grow past the size of the chart. So we don't want that. We're going to look into how to what's called normalizing these values so that all of the values are between 0 and 1 for height purposes. But for right now, because these are kind of by design between 0 and 1, we can just pass in that value and it will work for us. So now when we go back to Unity, we see we hit play and our bars are not changing size. That's mysterious. Let's see why that's the case. Transform. I wonder if I actually can't just get a reference. Is the reference not working? Let's find out. What we're going to do is we're going to copy this. Actually, I'm going to copy this line first. And then we're going to copy all of this. It's possible there's something else I'm overlooking, but this is my first guess as to why this isn't working. We're going to comment these out for a moment so that they don't actually take effect. And we're actually going to get that rect transform in each step here, which is obviously a lot more typing than I would want to do, which is why I had tried to do this shortcut, but it might be causing us an issue. So we'll save that, go back here and hit play. Yeah, no, it wasn't that. Okay. I can delete this line again. Give me just a minute. I'm going to look into why this isn't working out for us, and I will be right back with you guys. Okay, we're back, and I figured out why this wasn't working. In my efforts of doing this, I've been changing the height of the actual bar container, not the bar itself. In order to change the height of the bar, we need to actually say new bar dot bar. And actually, if I delete this here, I'll do it this way. There it is. New bar dot bar, which is the reference to the actual, as we said, the actual visible bar here. Oops. Our bar image, not just the holder. What I had been doing was just changing the size of that invisible container, which obviously doesn't show us any difference. So now that we have that set up, we should now see if I hit play. There we go. Now we are actually changing. So this one is 0.1 of the entire height of this. This one is double that, 0.2, and this one is at 0.7. So obviously this isn't a perfect solution right now. Like I say, if I were to, actually let's show the example. If I were to add another bar here that's 1.5 F, for example, and now I hit play, we're going to see that this bar goes way up. It's actually stretching off of our screen because it's too high. So that's one issue that we're having, is that this is not being normalized so that all of the data will fit on the screen properly. Now there may be a situation where you want to break out of the chart, you know, for dynamic effect, but in most cases you're going to want your data to stay within your chart so it's actually readable and understandable. Another thing is that obviously we don't have any color or any labels, any information to this. So while we've got a functioning chart, we don't really, it's not a very useful chart for us right now because we don't have any of the kind of indicators and information that really make it useful. So in our next video, we're going to look at adding some labels and normalizing our data so that we can always keep it contained within the chart. Thanks for watching.